Okay. Hi guys, I'm back. And don't be alarmed. I actually didn't just wake up. I look like I just woke up, or maybe just rolled out of bed, but I actually have been working at the hospital since about 5:15 this morning. So um, I look kind of crazy today. I've got some flyaways and everything else, but um, we're going to pick up in chapter 8 with organizational systems. Okay. This is something that it's not necessarily anything that's new. We work and live in organizational systems all the time. We maybe don't call them organizational systems, but something that you're very familiar with. The first term we're going to talk about is hierarchy, and it is just the different levels of authority within an organization. So we're going to look at an example that you're all very familiar with, and that is our school system. So at the very top, we have the Rensselaer Central School Corporation board. Okay. Below the board, then Mr. Craig is in there. And then Mr. Craig branches out to each of the four principals at each of the four buildings. So we have Mrs. Norris, Mr. Wynn, Mr. Michael, and then Mr. Jones. Below each of those principals, then we get into each of the teachers. We would have custodial staff, we would have maintenance staff, we would have the office staff and aides. Okay. Rather than listing every single person that's employed within each of the schools, I kind of broke it down with just the teachers for now. But under Mrs. Norris, then pre-K teachers, kindergarten, first grade, and second grade, and then through each of the buildings. Okay, this is to show that kind of who reports to who. So I fall into the CTE department. Okay, and this shows that I report directly to Mr. Jones. Okay, and Mrs. Schmidt-Gerker. I do not report to Mrs. Norris. I don't report to Mr. Wynn. Okay, I'm in the high school building, so I report to Mr. Jones, who then reports to Mr. Craig. Lines of authority. Lines of authority are a hierarchy of command from the top down through all the different ranks of employees. Lines to show who's in charge of who and who reports to whom. Okay, so just like on that last screen, it shows that the preschool first, second, and kindergarten teachers report to Mrs. Norris. They wouldn't report to Mr. Jones. Okay. Chain of command. Chain of command and hierarchy of authority are kind of one and the same, in that chain of command shows kind of a flow of decision making. Okay, so I can't make a big decision in my classroom without getting it approved by Mr. Jones first. And a lot of times, then Mr. Jones would have to take that approval to Mr. Craig, who might ultimately even have to take it to the school board. Mr. Craig can't just make a single decision. If we were going to say, this was a joke we made a lot in my health science and my midterm classes this year, because I was planning to take them to see the bodies exhibit. I found out that it was traveling to Michigan, and I wanted to take them on a big field trip up there. But when I first learned about the bodies exhibit was when I was in Las Vegas this summer, and I joked with them that I'd love to take them to Las Vegas and go through the bodies exhibit. Now, if I were serious about that, if I were going to try and take a group of students to Las Vegas, I couldn't just come in one day and say, hey guys, we're going to take a field trip to Las Vegas. I need you to fill out this paperwork, take it home to your parents and fill out the paperwork. Okay, I would have to get that approved with Mrs. Schmidt-Gerker and Mr. Jones, who would have to take it to Mr. Craig, who would definitely have to take it to the school board because we were going out of state. Okay, so it just kind of shows who we report to, who we have to run those big decisions by. Okay, then we're going to talk about handoff care reports. Okay, and that sounds a little wordy, kind of a little odd, but if you take it down and break it down, we're talking about handoff care. Okay. So if I'm taking care of someone and my shift ends, I'm going to hand that person, that patient, off to someone else. I can't just say, oh goodness, it's noon, I'm off duty, and just walk out the door. I have to make sure that the person who's coming in behind me knows what's been going on with that patient, what maybe I recommend. We might have a patient at sometimes where a patient's kind of in the middle of maybe getting transferred out of a facility. That doesn't mean I necessarily need to stay until 3 or 4 hours later when that person is finally transferred out. But I need to make sure that the person who's going to be taking care of them next knows what's going on with that case. Okay, so a definition for handoff care reports, something that's used with each new shift or change in the level of patient care to explain the patient's current condition. Okay, so if the situation that this happens a lot with me at the high school, I'm taking care of a patient, and then I determine that they need to go to the emergency room. Okay. Sometimes I would just contact their parents, maybe call their parents down from the stands, and then tell their parents, I really think little Johnny here needs to be seen in the ER. And so I would explain why I think that they need to be seen in the ER. And then we would establish a plan to get that person to the ER. Other times, I might not give the parents a say, and I might say, we're calling 911. And then the ambulance crew arrives. And then what happens? I tell the ambulance crew who I am, why I'm involved, what's going on with the patient, and why we think we need to transfer them to the ER. Okay. Then the ER takes them to the hospital and does the same kind of a checkoff, reporting with the ER staff, letting them know what they look like when they picked them up at RCHS, what they look like now, and what they're looking like as they're handing them off. Okay, so it's used anytime one healthcare worker is handing a patient to another worker. Okay, same thing happens. It's not necessarily with patient care, but the same thing's happening with me at the hospital every single time I'm working a shift. Okay, someone, not always. This morning, someone wasn't working at 5:30 before I came in, but most days there's someone working before I go in. I come in, they tell me what's been happening, they tell me how busy we've been, they tell me if there's any new policy changes as to the way we're reporting things or visitor restrictions, anything like that. And then I work my shift, and then the person that comes in behind me, I go through the same thing with them to let them know, catch them up on what's going on. Okay. So when we're doing these handoffs, there's kind of a set um, communication protocol, I guess, that we do to make sure all the things are taken care of, and we call that the ideal method. Okay, as you can see, there I, D, E, A, and L are capitalized, meaning that they're an acronym. Okay, so I stands for identify. And if you're thinking about identifying, hopefully whoever is taking over for you knows who you are and knows why you're taking care of the patient. Maybe they don't. In the case that EMS, I often tell them that I'm the athletic trainer here and this is why I'm involved. But it mainly means to identify the patient. Okay, we want to identify the patient by their name, their record number if we have it in front of us, the date of birth, and physician name. That way, it doesn't happen here often, but maybe in a big hospital, there might be two Ashley Webbs on the same floor. And so you wouldn't want to get those charts mixed up. Or there's simply just two Ashley Webbs in their system as far as documentation. The D stands for diagnosis. Okay, diagnosis is pretty clear cut. This is talking about the diagnosis and their current condition. Okay, so you might say, I'm talking about Ashley Webb, date of birth 6/17/82. She is the diabetic that's been hospitalized for the last week. And towards the middle of the day, her blood sugar was really, really crashing. And so her numbers have been down under 100 all afternoon. That's the type of information that you want to give the next person that's coming in to take care of you so that you can show that there's been a change in the current condition, that it's not at the norm. E stands for events. Okay. This also is recent events or changes in their condition or treatment. So it might be a change that going on with right now that um, the patient has really taken a turn and they're not doing well. And it's been determined that they're at towards the end of life. Not necessarily for a COVID patient only, but maybe for someone who's been in for some heart issues or something like that. But change in events that might change their condition. So, change in their vitals that show that we have decided that it's an end of life situation. And if it's changed to an end of life situation, then that means that family is going to be allowed to come in. Okay, right now, once the hospital staff determines that it's an end of life situation, patients are allowed to have one visitor. That's at Franciscan hospitals and facilities. It's different for all the different facilities, but for Franciscan, that's the policy. So we would say, there's been change in the vitals. We are anticipating end of life, and we're going to, we've called the family and let them know that one person could come in. A stands for anticipated. Okay. Anticipate changes and what to watch for. So if you're noticing that the blood sugar's been getting low, you're going to talk to them about maybe some changes in that it's getting really low when um, between breakfast and lunch. Okay, so we had to give the patient a snack. So you might not want that person going from lunch to dinner without another little snack. L stands for leave, and that is to leave time for questions and clarification. Okay. Just with like in my situation, with screening patients at the hospital, I always stick around a little bit longer. I tell them everything that's changed in the shift, and then I hold out for a little bit just to see if something comes up as a possible question. Okay, so that way I can clarify anything. They certainly can text me or call me anytime once I've left, but that way we can answer any questions face to face and get that clarified before I take off. Okay, that's all for today. Next time, we're going to start getting into legal and ethical issues for therapeutic workers.